So good day, friends. This is Dr. Bob Hamilton, and you have tuned in today to the Hamilton Review, where kids and culture collide. Thank you for being here. It means a lot to me that you take your time, your precious time, to be part of, to tune into the show. It means a lot to me. And this week, we are bringing back the guest we had last week. His name is Mark DeMoss. He is an author. He has also done a lot of other things. He is a public relations practitioner, executive, and consultant. He did it for 4 decades. He was the president of a company called DeMoss, which he ran as the president from 1991 to 2019, serving mainly faith-based organizations. So, Mark, welcome back to the Hamilton Review.
Thank you. This is a fun conversation for me.
And me too. Absolutely. So listen, in your work as a PR guy, and I read your book. By the way, Mark's book, I have to tell you, for those who did not hear last week's show, is called The Little Red Book of Wisdom. We're going to talk about this book in more detail. Excellent book. A book that has really changed my life. I'll tell you about that in a second. But Mark, you ran into a lot of amazing people in your career. I'm just curious, couple of people that you think are standouts. Who did you work with, and who did you admire?
Well, I worked with a man named Chuck Colson, who is in heaven now, but was a part of the Richard Nixon's White House team and went to prison for Watergate-related offenses, and really came to know Jesus while in prison, and coming out of prison, started a ministry to prisoners called Prison Fellowship. And so a man who had been at the height of power in America, in the halls of power in the White House, gave the rest of his life, stooped all the way to prison, and then gave the rest of his life to serving prisoners. Was a remarkable man, a remarkable author and thinker, and a very special person in my life. I think of about 10 years ago, a Dr. Kent Brantley, who was serving with Samaritan's Purse in Liberia, contracted Ebola and was airlifted to America, very even controversial at the time, because this was the first real sort of high-profile Ebola case, and he came and was put in isolation at Emory University Hospital here in Atlanta, and our team had the privilege and the task of really sort of introducing Dr. Brantley to the world. And it was a remarkable experience. I remember going down there to meet with him, and he was in this, I think I was one of the first non-medical staff to actually go talk to him, but he was behind all this heavy plastic, hazmat kind of environment. And and so we had this little meeting to begin to plan his exit from the hospital. And that was a very emotional thing. And he's a remarkable man that, we got to know. I got to know and work.
By the way, Mark, I just want to interject real quickly. I know the story of Ken Brantley quite well, because I was actually in Africa when the whole Ebola thing happened, and I had to exit because we were doing a medical mission trip there, and we were right in a place called Guinea-Bissau, and we had to literally flee, and Liberia, of course, is right next to these countries. And I remember the story of Ken Brantley and what happened to him. He actually got an infusion, I think, of immune globulins, which saved his life. And that was very controversial at that time. But that's amazing that you were part of that there at Emory University. Amazing.
Yeah. And then I'll just mention another one. I mean, I've gotten to be in so many amazing environments and situations, but I think of college football coach, University of Colorado, Bill McCartney, wins a national championship in, I think, 1990, and starts this ministry called Promise Keepers,
Sure.
with a few hundred men initially, and they started having events in basketball arenas and then football stadiums and NFL stadiums, and eventually in 1997 gathering, by some estimates, 1 million men on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. And we were in the center of that, and handling all of the communications and the media, and had over 1,000 media representatives there covering that event. And so it's amazing how God uses people. And this was a football coach who didn't have any experience in building a movement or a ministry or an organization, and it for a season in time was a really remarkable movement that a lot of men would say helped put their marriage back together or made them a better father. And so this is the kind of stuff I've been privileged to do for 40 years, and it's really it's been an amazing journey.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, these are important moments, which I remember very well. I remember they call it the Million Man March. And that was such an incredible thing. Promise Keepers, I think they did put 1 million people in Washington, D.C. for a good reason, because we need men in marriages. We need men in the lives of kids. And this is certainly where kids and culture collide, is in bringing men back into the equations. And thus, I'm a big part of that. Well, that's fascinating. You've had an incredibly interesting life. So segueing to this book that you wrote. Okay, so Mark DeMoss has made it a discipline of his to daily read a chapter in the book of Proverbs written by Solomon. And Solomon says it well. He says, wisdom is the principal thing, therefore get wisdom. And wisdom is regarded more higher than the choicest silver, the best gold, and all the treasures and jewels you can imagine. And I do think that's true. So, Mark, you read a chapter every day of the book of Proverbs. You wrote this book, The Little Red Book of Wisdom, published by Thomas Nelson. And folks, I do want you to buy this book. I think this is one. I don't usually make these kind of hardcore, recommendations, but this is one of them. One of the mini chapters he wrote, which I found to be interesting, was called "Shut Up and Listen." I like that. I mean, I kind of want to say that to some of my patients sometimes, and some of my teenagers who walk in the office. But can you elaborate a little bit on this idea of just listening and not talking?
Yeah, so I think just instinctively, most of us like to talk, and listening, I think, is rare. Unfortunately, I think for whatever reason, I think I've always been a pretty good listener. People tell me I'm a good listener. Usually, I ran a company, small company. I mean, we had 25 employees at our PR firm. More often than not, in a meeting, even in my own company, I would often be among the last to speak on a particular topic. I certainly, by rank, had the right and privilege to speak first and as often as I wanted, but I wanted to listen. I wanted to hear what others had to say. I wanted to give other people a chance to contribute. I think because I listen, when I speak, I think what I'm saying is probably more effective and can have a greater impact because I have the benefit of what's been spoken before I speak. I love. I quoted. Well, a lot of your listeners won't maybe remember Larry King because he's been off of CNN for a while. But I think Larry King interviewed more guests in talk radio in history of than anybody, and was on an hour a night interviewing guests. And he famously said, I never learned anything while I was talking. And he was a good listener. And so I think, I write in that chapter an illustration of a congressional hearing in Washington, D.C., where a Supreme Court nominee is going through their hearings. And this is supposed to be an opportunity where senators ask questions of the nominee. And so you learn their opinions and how they would handle certain things. And invariably, the senators do all the talking, and the nominee for the Supreme Court is sitting there while time is expiring as a senator, made a speech. And so I think it's just a good thing to listen, and I think this is important with our children. I think as a parent, you can sort of pull rank and interrupt your kids because you're the parent and it's your house. But I think we ought to hear our kids out, let them say what's on their mind, and then wait to respond. And I just think it's a good practice. And I think it's a compliment if somebody tells you you're a good listener. I take it as a compliment. So I encourage it highly.
No, I think you're right. As a doctor, I try to be a good listener, to listen to my patients. I don't get that comment that I'm a great listener enough. And so when I read your chapter, I thought, you know what? I'm going to try to change. I'm going to try to listen a little bit more. I can be loquacious, and it's good and bad. I think that, but that I have to say, when I read your chapter, I loved the other story you told in this chapter about the very, very important person who came to the board meeting. Tell that story, because this is very funny. It made me chuckle out loud. Can you share that with everyone?
Yes, I'm chuckling too, because it really was comical how it unfolded. And I didn't use the name in the chapter, so I won't use it here. But it would be a household name if I mentioned it. But this organization had invited this, I'll just say, very important person to their headquarters for a meeting. And they were going to, and I was there accompanying the very important person. And so I'm just, a fly on the wall in this session. And so we arrived at the front door. The president of the organization escorted us up to this boardroom, and the organization was presenting a vision for some, global strategy they had to reach the world. It was a grandiose plan. And for an hour or so, this head of this organization did all the talking. And their guest, who really was a world-renowned, he's dead now, but was a world-renowned leader, almost didn't speak for this entire meeting. And the meeting ended. We had to leave to go to something else. And we get back in the car, and the guest of the meeting turns, I'm not making this up, he turned around to me and our companion in the back seat, and he said, "Who was the fella in there doing all the talking?" I mean, it was really such a squandered opportunity. And I mean, I've had some interesting experiences, and I'm pretty sensitive in the book. I'm not embarrassing anybody in this book. So if you read the story, you won't know who I'm talking about, but it happened exactly the way I described it.
That's funny. Yeah. Well, I noticed that in your book, you really were very careful not to be cast aspersion on anybody at all, which to your credit. A couple other things, and I'm watching the time here just for our listeners. So one of the things that you talk about in this book, it really kind of hit me. One of them is this idea of writing notes on actual stationery and putting them in the mail, and having, what the effect that has. As a result of that chapter, I want you to know, Mark, that I literally came back to California. I looked at my business manager and said, I need new stationery. We need to find some new stationery because I need to discipline myself to start writing again. I was pretty good at this in days gone by, but I have allowed the technology now for just simply when it's a birthday, I will go, happy birthday, and I will write a text, lots of emojis and, birthday cakes and all this kind of stuff that we all do. No condemnation out there, friends. But anyway, that's me. I do that. I said, you know what? Mark is right. Taking the time to synthesize a cogent, letter of happy birthday or thank you is more meaningful. And I'd like you just to kind of say a word about that chapter, which I thought it really did change me. And I'm going to start doing this.
I love hearing that. This might be my favorite chapter in this book. Look, letter writing is a lost art, honestly. And with the increase of technology, it's even more lost. And so, which to me, the fact that almost nobody writes letters anymore is more reason to write a letter, because it'll have a bigger impact, because nobody's getting letters. They're getting text messages and emails and, hey, thank you for dinner last night. We'll text that to somebody that took us out to dinner. I want to write them a letter and put it in an envelope and hand address it and put a stamp on it and walk it out to my mailbox. I put 2 in there this morning. A few days ago, I put 8 handwritten letters in the mailbox. I probably averaged, 1 or 2 a day all year long. And I believe, I say this, the impact of a letter always exceeds the effort that it took to write it. And I remember one night our daughter was in high school. It was during basketball season. And I think she just had a tough day. And I went to tell her goodnight. She was sitting on her bed, leafing through a box of envelopes. I said, "What's that?" She said, "It's my letterbox." I didn't know she had a letterbox, but it had a bunch of my letters in there, and she's kept them all. Wow. And she would go back and look at them for encouragement. And I just think you don't ever know the impact that a letter has on somebody. And I don't mean you don't have to write a long letter. Most of the letters I write are on this little card right here.
Yeah.
I can write a letter on this, even front and back, in 3, 4, 5 minutes, and then the person's going to go to their mailbox and open a piece of mail that's not a bill, it's not junk mail. I think it's a powerful thing, and almost nobody does it. And so I encourage it. I wish I could bring it back in a big way, but maybe in a small way, like you went and got some stationery made, printed, and are doing it. And we ought to write you have, I think, a lot of moms listening. We ought to write letters to our children. Um, they get enough text messages from their
Yeah.
friends.
Yeah.
Get them, and I don't mean just get a letter and go stick it on their bed. I did that the night before my boy's graduation, I mentioned last week. But um, write a letter and put it in the mailbox, even to your own house, and let it go to the post office and come back. It costs you 68 cents, I think. Um, and let your child get an actual piece of mail.
Yeah.
Um, that's a pretty neat thing. And when they go to college, our kids ought to get letters from us at college. Letters, not emails. So I preach this hard whenever I can, and um,
No,
it's a great thing.
Mark, this is good stuff. This is old school. This is very old school, and that I will tell you, that spoke to me. And I said, okay, you know what? This is an easy thing to do. Let's get the stationery. Let's get moving on it. I have one last thing I want to ask you about. You have a chapter about anticipating deathbed regrets. This is a little morbid, I suppose, to my young families who have these beautiful little children, but it's very applicable, friends, because the things that when we are, those last moments of life, when we think about our life, we do look back. I think most people reflect and think about the good and the bad and the ugly. And I think that this chapter spoke to me as well. So if you could kind of articulate some of your thoughts about that chapter.
Yeah, I'm going to make it not morbid, because it really is a. I think it's uh, actually a pretty positive concept. But I remember, I don't know, long time ago when I was young, um, I was struck by anytime I would hear of or read an article about somebody who was nearing the end of life, or uh, even dying, who would reflect on their life and talk about regrets. And you would hear things like, I regret I wasn't a better father. I regret that I worked so much and spent so little time at home. Or I regret that I traveled so much and I missed out on a lot of my children's lives. Or I regret that I drank too much. Or I regret that I didn't take care of my body. I didn't exercise, whatever it is. So as I was working on this book, I thought, no matter what age you are, if you were asked today, if you knew you were going to die tonight, what regrets would you have right now? We would all have an answer to that question. So then I said, well, if we know what we would regret now if we died, why don't we take steps to avoid those regrets? So if you know that you would regret not taking care of your body, let's say you don't exercise, you don't eat healthy, you're way overweight, you don't have energy, and you would regret that one day, fix it. Like, go
right.
ahead and do what you need to do so that regret won't be on your list. If you know that you would regret working so many hours at your office and not being at home enough, do something now to not have that regret when you die. And so I really think this is about, it's, to me, it's not a morbid thought about dying. It's a encouraging thought about living well. And because we can all do something today, if we have children at home, to be more invested in their lives. We can all do something today to take better care of our bodies. We can all do something today to show our wife or husband that we love them. And so I just I thought, what a shame to you know die with regrets when you knew 30 years before you died what you would regret. And I think we can avoid these regrets. So I don't want to say, look, I don't want to be arrogant and say I'm going to have no regrets. But I don't think I'm going to have a lot of regrets.
It's a very, very powerful statement. And listen, I've had a lot of people on this podcast. Friends, those are some really, really wise recommendations. And I know I'm speaking to mainly a young audience, young parents, but you got more time to work on it. That's all I got to say. People like me who are getting closer to this moment, we don't have as much time to work on these potential and these regrets. You guys who are listening with young kids, think about it, because this is profound. Okay, well, Mark, listen, we're, again, the name of the book is The Little Red Book of Wisdom. It is published by Thomas Nelson. It's a fabulous book. It's an easy read. Listen, it's a couple hundred pages. You'll be able to read it, lickety-split. But there's a lot of tremendous wisdom in this book, and I encourage you all to find it and buy it and actually pass it on to the people in your life, because it's well written and very interesting to read. So we are going to end it right there. Mark DeMoss, you have been such a pleasure to speak with. Thank you for being on the show a week ago and today. I really appreciate your wisdom. And friends, thank you for tuning in to the Hamilton Review, where kids and culture collide. Until next time, be well, be safe. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
You have been listening to the Hamilton Review, where kids and culture collide. Thank you for allowing us to be a part of your day. Tune in again next week on Apple Podcast. Rate and comment and tell a friend.